Hello, welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 classic Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for Have You Got Any Castles, released in 1938. It's the 205th in the series and it's directed by Frank Tashlin. This one has an interesting history regarding its release when it came to its reissues and such, but you can find this short on the Looney Tunes Golden Collection Volume 2 DVD set. It is in the public domain though, and I'll have the short playing for you at the very end of this review. So after you see all the history and trivia I'm going to give you, you might watch the short a little bit differently this time. I don't know, but I hope at least you guys learned something today. In case you haven't seen it, and I'm just mentioning this just for consistency with the other reviews, since again you can watch this at the very end. But this is the second in Tashlin's Books Coming to Life trilogy, and I guess magazines too. And all it is that you've got Alexander Wilcott in the beginning, opening things up, and we see a whole bunch of characters just coming out of books and just singing certain songs, including the title track. Now in this review, I'm going to go through all of the references, repeated animation, all that good stuff, so you know exactly what the references this short is showing off, and believe me, there's a lot in this one. When it comes to the music itself, my good friend Manny, the tuning tenor, he's going to talk about the musical references in this short, as this short is actually promoting a song. And my good friend Austin Kelly, he's on all the Frank Tashlin reviews. He's just going to give a few thoughts as well and pose one interesting question regarding the restoration of this short. But let's go through the review and trivia for this one. Now, what's interesting is that when this short was finally released on DVD, and this was like, 20 years ago at the time of this recording, which is insane to me. It feels like only yesterday I only got my first DVD. But anyway, on the Looney Tunes Golden Collection Volume 2, they released this short, and you'll notice that there's some splices in the beginning and at the very end. And that's because when we see our initial character, Alexander Wilcott, the town crier, he's ringing his bell and so on, he specifically asked that his caricature get removed from all reissues of this short following his death. And sure enough, they actually did that. They removed it, and they also did this as part of the Blue Ribbon program. So for the longest time, you could only find this short where it starts off with those monsters dancing to Gavotte, and then it ends with the characters going into the Gone with the Wind book. The short still makes sense somewhat that way anyway, so it wasn't a huge loss, but thankfully they did find the original opening and ending, and they put that in here. You might be having one other question regarding why they're using the Blue Ribbon titles, and I will get to that at the very end of this review. I figure I'll leave you guys in suspense in some way. But given all the references, I'm going to go through this short now from start to finish, and I'm going to point out all the references within. The only thing I won't do is if there's like very tiny writings of certain books in the background, I'm not going to go through that, otherwise I'll be here forever. I'm going to just refer to books that are rather prominent and any interesting observations within. And even when I'm referring to the books, I'm not going to go too in-depth in them. And all the celebrity parodies, again, I'm not going to go too in-depth, but the point of all this is that you'll be able to know what the references are, so then if you decide, hey, I want to look more into this, you have the opportunity to do so. But let's start off with the beginning, and I like the mood that this whole short sets. So in this quaint little bookstore, and I'm sure these bookstores still exist around, you go in, you can smell all the musky books. And even though this short, when it comes to restoration, it could definitely be improved upon, it's full of what's known as digital video noise reduction. So you've got some of the animated line work disappearing here and there and all that. And now with today's technology, they could actually fix those two splices way better. So I'm hoping one day they'll revisit this. Regardless, when you start this short off, you feel like you're in this wonderful old bookstore, and we pan over to our town crier, whom I already mentioned is Alexander Wilcott. So he was a prominent radio personality and critic, and you would have seen him if you watched the reviews for The Woods Full of Cuckoos. He was in that one too, parodied as a bird. Now, the reason he's in front of the book called The Town Crier, his radio show was called The Town Crier, and he would say, all is well, all is well. So he would have that kind of wonderful vocal quality to him, and here is voiced by Mel Blanc. And all the vocal credits I'm going to give you comes from Keith Scott's Wonderful Cartoon Voices book, and I have a link below to that book, and it's a wonderful book to have. So we panned through some books. Now, what you will notice all throughout this short, and I'm just going to mention this point now, but you will see this as we go along, you're going to see some books which aren't real, but the authors certainly are, because they are actually staff members at Warner Brothers during this time. So you've got names like Ted Pierce, Henry Binder, Ray Katz, Art Loomer, Frank Tashlin himself, John McGrew, Ralph Wool, Cal Howard, Dave Mitchell, Keith Darling, Charlotte Darling, Friz Freleng, Carl Starling, Norman Spencer, Ben Hardaway, Robert Bentley, Frank Powers, Betty Burke, Anne Almond, Malvin Millar, and Tex Avery. So those names are spread all throughout the short and in the background. I'm hoping one day, again, if they revisit this short for a high-definition restoration, we might be able to identify more, because some of the details are certainly murky in the back. But we start off with, honestly, my favorite scene in this whole short. The books of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Fu Manchu, Phantom of the Opera, and Frankenstein. They're all very famous books with horror elements, and they've all been adapted into film. And this was released during the time where you had some of those wonderful black and white horror classics that I encourage everyone to watch today. In fact, a lot of these books are more or less in the public domain too, so if you really need to read some of that stuff, well, it's easy to find. But what I love about this scene is the whole fake out. So you see all these characters walking forward, looking all terrified and scary, but then we just pause just enough. And then they just start dancing the Gavotte, which is the song that Manny will touch upon later on once he goes through the music of this. But it's so perfect. It's just the animation of them dancing is just so ridiculous. Again, I love it. So we see a crowd shot, which is more or less repeated throughout the short. I mean, you don't want to have to animate crowd shots over and over again, right? But again, I'm not going to go through all of these characters that are here, but they are more or less very popular literary characters. More so at the time, maybe less so now, but they're easy to find out about. Now, here's our first reference that a lot of people may not be aware of today, because those 4 horror books, most people would know what they are, or at least have a passing familiarity to them. Here we see a book by Pearl S. Buck, The Good Earth. The novel depicts family life in a Chinese village in an early 20th century setting, hence why the title's in Chinese, hence why Mel Blanc is doing that Chinese-type voice. But of course, The Good Earth, the character's praying, of course, you got to be good, you got to say your prayers, that's of course what it's touching upon, but he does mention Papa Leon and Uncle Ray, and that's a reference to Leon Schlesinger, who was the current producer of the Looney Tunes shorts, and Raymond Katz, who was his brother-in-law. Then we see The Invisible Man, so that is clearly inspired by The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells, who's a scientist who makes himself invisible and becomes insane. It's in the public domain, easy to read, easy to find, many film adaptations as well. The next one, however, you may not be aware of. You see another invisible character, and it's called Topper. So that is based off of Cosmo Topper, the character of the ghost-themed novel Topper. But Topper's not a ghost in the novel, it's just a regular guy haunted by ghosts, but yeah, I guess Tasha just wanted to do a bit of a matching parody with The Invisible Man, and hey, it's fine. This is one of those jokes where it still works even if you don't quite know the reference. Now, we briefly see the novel The 39 Steps. Now, the actual novel is an adventure novel, and it's the first in a series featuring spy Richard Hannay. But of course, watching this short, you would think that it was just some book about tap dancing, but I assure you it's not. But who's parodied here? That is Bill Robinson. He was an African-American tap dancer and actor. He's perhaps most famous for tap dancing with Shirley Temple in a lot of her films in the 1930s, so he was definitely a well-known figure. And then we see the novel So Big. Of course, they're going to have Greta Garbo there with her large feet, and it's certainly not the first nor the last time they're going to parody her feet. They always seem to pick on her with that physical attribute, but anyway, that's based off of a novel from 1924 written by Edna Ferber, and that's inspired by the life of a person living in a Dutch community in Illinois. So that would be a rather obscure book, I would imagine. But I do warn you though, if you're going to look up that book, because it'd be in the public domain, make sure you write down So Big and the author Edna Ferber, otherwise you might get some unsavory results on Google. Then we see a whole bit involving the Green Pastures. So the Green Pastures, that's based off a play and then subsequently a movie. I do go into that in my review on Clean Pastures, which was another Merry Melody short that parodied Green Pastures. So if you want to find out more about that, definitely check out that review. In fact, this entire scene where we see Cap Calloway, Fats Waller, and the Mills brothers, all of that is lifted from that short. So I guess technically this makes Friz Freleng a co-director of sorts, because I have seen around people putting Friz Freleng as a co-director when, no, he wasn't a co-director. In fact, At this point, he wasn't even at the studio, it was at MGM. Nonetheless, the footage does come from a Friz Freleng directed Merry Melody short, and I definitely encourage you to check that one out. It is one of the Censored 11, which also means when this short came out on the Looney Tunes Golden Collection, this is perhaps the closest that we've gotten to have Censored 11 on physical media. So there is that, I guess. And you can imagine that this scene would have been cut for television. In fact, this short wasn't really played much on TV as far as I understand it because of the stereotypes within. And if it did, scenes like this would have no doubt been cut out. So we see the crowd again as we pan over to Heidi, which is kind of a weird gag here, but it's a real novel. Again, Heidi, and that was from 1881. And it depicts the life of a girl named Heidi and about her life and experiences in the Swiss Alps and in Frankfurt. So I guess it's just one of those really obscure books, which again, you can probably find online if you have a look. Keith Scott is actually not sure who does the voice here. He's got unknown written down, so hopefully one day we'll know who that is. But the gag itself, I guess that's her maybe imitating Cap Calloway's scatting voice, because he would always say stuff like Heidi, 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 ho, and the audience would repeat. So if you have a better idea as to what this bit would mean in terms of a gag, definitely let me know. But that's all I can think of, is that that's just her version of scatting like Cap Calloway, who we saw not long ago. So we then see the Thin Man, and here is, well, literally thin. I mean, what other gag are you going to go for here? And that is from the novel The Thin Man, and it was also adapted into films, which the actor William Powell, who is parodied here, played the title character. The animation here is lifted from Tashland's very own Speaking of the Weather short. I mean, if the gag worked that time, why not reuse it? As he's walking through, you'll do notice that there's a note in the background asking Boss for a raise. You know, is that a cheeky reference to Tashland asking Schlesinger for a raise and not getting it or whatever? I mean, he does leave after a few shorts after this, ending his first directing career at Warner's, but I do love the look of this shot here as the character's walking along. So you got the two layers. You got the bookshelves in the back and you got the foreground in the front. Then you got the White House Cookbook. That is a real book, and that was like a comprehensive cookbook and household manual written during the late 19th century. And yeah, it was filled with recipes from the White House. And it's been reprinted ever since. So I guess the food must have been really good to give Mr. Powell a nice big rump there. So there's that. Now from here until the end of the short, the pace really picks up so quickly. All these references come so hard and fast, sometimes for only a few seconds at a time. So up until now, it's been relatively slower pace, but Tashland really kicks up into gear. Another interesting thing about this short is that it is similar to what was going on even from the Harmonizing days, where they would do things coming to life. But here, Tashland takes the same concept but turns it up to 11 and makes an entertaining short, even if you don't perhaps understand all the references within. So we see Whistler's mother. Of course she's whistling. I mean, that's based off a famous painting, and the whistling is apparently done by a person named Georgia Stark. I couldn't find that much information about that person, so if you know, definitely let me know. Then we see a musical number involving Little Women and Little Men. Most people would know of Little Women because that's a pretty famous book by Louisa May Alcott. She did write a sequel, Little Men, so the first one is about the coming-of-age story. Chances are you've probably seen a film adaptation, so you probably know what it's all about. And the second novel is based on one of the sisters' career as a teacher, and you got male students instead. But of course, if you were to look at these book covers, you'd think they would just be about little kids or something, but no, it's definitely not. And there's no information as to who does the vocals here, which is a shame. It'd be good to know who does the singing here. In any case, we then see Old King Cole, and this is based off a British nursery rhyme, and he's voiced here by Harry Stanton. I love the angle and animation of King Cole here, however brief it may be. It's just the shot that was chosen, I don't know, it just works so well here. The next parody, definitely an eye-rolling one if you know the reference, maybe not so much if you didn't know, but we see the novel, which is The House of Seven Gables, which is what's considered a Gothic novel, and it's about a life of an impoverished heiress in a gloomy family mansion in New England. And there's apparently a curse involved as well. But you wouldn't really know that because you would assume that that book is all about Seven Clark Gables, who was a famous film actor at the time. I mean, I love Clark Gable, but 7 of them, I think that's perhaps a bit too much, and yeah, real eye-rolling gag right there. And speaking of eye rolling, this one is pretty obscure, but it makes it even funnier once you know the reference, because you're probably thinking, why is there a bulldog drumming along here? What's the point of that? I mean, if someone came up with that from scratch, they would be either a genius or a madman, but that is based off the character Bulldog Drummond. Get it? Drumming Bulldog? Bulldog Drummond? Ha ha. But the character is basically a gentleman adventurer, first appearing in the novel Bulldog Drummond. So there's that. There was like a whole series of novels involving that character. Very obscure today. Then we see Louis Pasteur, who was a real person. So he was a biologist and a chemist, and he's more or less the father of the principles of vaccination and pasteurization, so things that led to a better quality of life that we have today. So the caricature here is of actor Paul Mooney, or Manny. I'm not sure pronunciation on that, but he actually won an Oscar for his role in the movie The Story of Louis Pasteur. So why not use him for this? It makes complete sense. I believe Seventh Heaven is a reference to the popular 1920s play, which was then made into two movies, one silent, one not, that was released before this short. If you think it's anything else, let me know, but I believe that's the reference there. Then we see William Bligh, who is one of the main characters on Mutiny on the Bounty, and around this time, there was a movie starring Charles Laughton who's parodied here, and that's perhaps the most famous version of that story. Now we see Rip Van Winkle, and this is probably the closest thing we're going to have to a running story here, where we've got a few gags around this character and then a punchline at the very end, with the punchline not being seen for years until the release of The Golden Collection Volume 2. So it's from the story Rip Van Winkle by Washington Irving, and it's a story that's been covered countless times in pop culture, where Rip Van Winkle goes to sleep for 20 years and wakes up and everything's changed around him. And yes, I'm simplifying it, of course. Here is voiced by Mel Blanc. Now, if you look very closely, this is a parody of Ned Sparks, who was like seen as a really grumpy kind of actor. And he was parodied quite a few times in Warner Brothers as this serious stone-faced kind of person. But he's got a beard here, so it's easy to see why that would be missed. And we very briefly see a book, The Valiant Little Tailor, and that is a fairy tale from the Brothers Grimm, where a humble tailor who tricks many giants and a ruthless king into believing he's a hero. You might be more familiar with the Mickey Mouse version of this, The Brave Little Tailor, one of the greatest shorts ever made, but that's where that all originates from, and you just barely even see it. You then see Uncle Tom, a book that's perhaps controversial today, and Tom practices non-resistance and non-violence in that book. But so when we see Uncle Tom the second time, it's even funnier when he knocks out Rip Van Winkle, because he's supposed to be a non-violent character, but I guess Rip Van Winkle pissed him off one too many times. Then we see a generic book called Castles. I mean, I guess there would be a book like that around, maybe just a book on castles and there are photos taken or whatever. I'm sure it's around, but I do like the cinematic nature of that shot, how the trumpets just lift up the way they do. And we now see the Three Musketeers. That's probably one of the references here that most people would know of, and they were introduced in the novel The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. We briefly see the novel Drums Along the Mohawk in one very brief shot, slightly longer later, and that was a real book featuring a Native American drummer, and it's a historical novel depicting the Mohawk Valley during the American Revolutionary War. So it wasn't just created just to do a pun here, that actually was a real book. Next up, this is a cute gag. You've got two books next to each other. You've got one, Henry VIII. Most people know he's one of the most famous kings of England. When he was young, he was actually quite athletic, but then he had an injury and ended up getting too fat and ended up dying from being morbidly obese, hence the reference here to him eating. But the other reference there, it says Emily Host. That's a reference to etiquette writer Emily Post. And this gag has been touched upon before, but she's written a book on etiquette. So etiquette in society, in business, in politics, and at the home. Here she's voiced by Mel Blanc, and I've always loved when Mel Blanc does women's voices. I don't know, just something about it kills me every time. But it does set up this nice little joke later on. Then we see a parody of the book Mother India, where the scene is actually lifted directly from Speaking of the Weather. This is kind of interesting to see because this book at the time opposed the Indian independence movement and it criticized Indian society. I haven't actually read it. I was just looking at what this book actually was, and Well, I think it would be an interesting read in terms of the context. Next up, we have a very obscure joke. Most people wouldn't even know this, and I certainly didn't until researching it, but you see a person named Diamond Jim Brady, and he was a businessman who earned his fortune in the railway industry, but the reason for his nickname is that he was known for his vast collection of precious stones and jewels, especially diamonds, hence the name, and here is voiced by Mel Blanc. But then we cut back to Emily Host, and I like the fact that we got a little payoff here where she becomes a glutton herself and she just forgets everything that she's been teaching everyone else regarding etiquette. And we get a beautiful chef's kiss dad's joke of Oliver Twist, where the character actually just twists around. Sure, why not? And that's the protagonist of the novel Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. So we see a book, Red the Nose, ha ha. Well, that's a parody of Red the Rose, which is a 1934 novel about the American Civil War. And of course, you've got to have W.C. Fields here, voiced by Ted Pierce, who did a lot of the W.C. Fields impressions around this time. The nose and the drinking was all part of the W.C. Fields character that you would see in a lot of films. Most people would know the Pied Piper, and that's based off of the Pied Piper of Hamelin story. So you have the Piper all dressed up in pied clothing and was a rat catcher that was hired by a town to lure rats away, and he's able to do so with his flute. Although it sounds like a clarinet here, but anyway. Now, most of these shorts that involve things coming to life would include a villain of some kind in the third act, and everyone would band together and there'd be a big climax. Here is really weird because you've got the Three Musketeers, after they sing the song, they just decide to go and sneak off to release someone from prison. No motivation to do so whatsoever, which makes this even weirder. I mean, I think it's funnier because of it. If anything, the weakest thing about this short is perhaps that there's no real story to speak of, but given the nature of the short, you can somewhat forgive it. So I guess the Three Musketeers are the villains of sorts in this one? Sure, why not? It's another version of the story, I guess. But they go into a book called Three Men on a Horse, appropriately titled, but what Three Men on a Horse actually is, it's a three-act bit of comedic writing where there was all about horse racing. You got the main character, he's apparently able to pick the winners of every single horse race, but he cannot place any bets himself. Then we see 7 Keys to Bold Plate. I mean, the title is clearly a pun so they can pick up the keys, but no, the whole point of that is that it's a setting of Baldpate Mountain in New Jersey, so it's a story around that setting, but here there are literal keys, so there's that, I guess. Then we see the adventure novel, The Prison of Zender. That one might be a little bit more well-known to people. It's been made into a few films, and that just involves a king not being able to do his duties due to a scheme by his older brother, and so the loyalists to the king end up getting a look-alike cousin to impersonate the monarch in the meantime. Then we see Aladdin, and that's, again, most people might know Aladdin from the Disney film, which is a film I actually really adore, but that comes from 1001 Nights, although apparently the tale of Aladdin was added into it much later on. Here is voiced by Mel Blanc, and I love the animation here of him being knocked out. We see a parody of the novel The Informer, and that is all about the aftermath of the Irish Civil War of the mid-1920s. We see a parody of Victor McLagan, and I probably butchered that pronunciation, so apologies to anyone who is Irish. But the reason that actor's there, he played the main role in the 1935 film adaptation of this book, and he won the Academy Award as well. So the Informer tells little boy Blue, in this case little boy Blue, B-L-E-W, ha ha, and that all comes from the famous nursery rhyme that we all should know, and actually the boy turns blue while he blew onto his trumpet. Okay then. Then we see The Charge of the Light Brigade, which is a poem, and that is about the real-life charge of the Light Brigade during the Battle of Balaclava in 1854. Now, is that obscure enough for you, or what? We then very briefly see Robinson Crusoe, and we've seen a lot of adaptations of the Robinson Crusoe story involving Robinson Crusoe being shipwrecked on an island and befriending a character named Friday, and it's seen as problematic today, and so on and so forth. And I've covered Robinson Crusoe on a few reviews on this channel already. We see a parody of All Quiet on the Western Front, which, of course, is war-themed. That book's been adapted many times into film, but it's basically about the German soldier point of view in the Western Front during World War I. We see Under Two Flags, and that is from a novel, and that depicts military life in French Algeria, hence the desert setting and all the camels all marching out. And we see a whole bunch of characters. Again, they're really pissed off at the Three Musketeers. Again, I don't know why the Three Musketeers even did any of this. This story is very confusing if you really think about it, but whatever. And we see all sorts of livery figures. I'm not going to go into all of them. I mean, you see Tarzan, you see Robin Hood, and you see also a very good example as to why this perhaps wouldn't be shown so much on TV, regardless of your thoughts on the matter. But we see a payoff to the whole Rip Van Winkle thing. So originally he's upset, he's trying to sleep, he gets knocked out by Uncle Tom. This time, nope, I've had enough. So he uses the novel The Hurricane, which is a real book regarding a depiction of a hurricane in the Pacific Ocean. Sounds like it's riveting reading there. I'm sure you'll breeze right through that one. Ha ha. But sure enough, all the characters get blown away, and we see Gone with the Wind. We don't see any characters relating to that. It's a very famous book, which was then turned into a very famous movie from 1939. But, of course, they just use that as a pun because they're gone with the wind from the hurricane. Yes, ha ha. So the short in the reissues would stop around here, but thankfully we now can see the original ending, which we see Woolcott again saying goodnight to everyone, and we got everything calm, peaceful again after all that insane stuff that was going on. But on top of that, as we pan over, we get another payoff to Rip Van Winkle. We see that he's now going to finally fall asleep as he's tied up the bird's mouth, so we're not going to hear any cuckoos. And we finish right there. Okay, so the last element to cover is the music. So my good friend Manny Cruz, the tuning tenor, he's going to take over and he's going to discuss the music played within. So take it away, Manny.
Hi everyone, this is Manny Cruz, the tuning tenor, coming at you with the latest edition of It's Time for Manny's Music Time, with music trivia for you today. Bum! Oof, that wasn't my best, but I've had a long week. For the 1938 Merry Melody cartoon Have You Got Any Castles, directed by my fellow Jersey boy, Frank Tashlin, with musical direction by Carl Stalling. So this short is the second of the trilogy that Tashlin directed in his first run at Warner's as a director. This is the second overall. But his first as a director, he did 1937, Speaking of the Weather, and now this one, 1938, Have You Got Any Castles? And the final short that was released around the time he departed Warner's in 1938. And the last one would be the third of the trilogy, You're in Education, and I'll talk about that one in a later Manny's Music Time. So let's jump into this one, shall we? So obviously the title track, Have You Got Any Castles? It was written by Johnny Mercer and Richard Whiting. Now, if you want to learn more information about those two composers, for Johnny Mercer, I have the commentary that you can listen to for Porky at the Crocodero. And for Richard Whiting, I thought that I already spoke about him in a prior commentary, but one of these days I'll get to it because it's getting kind of late and I don't want to keep Anthony waiting for this recording any more than I have. So the title track comes from the 1937 film Varsity Show. Dick Powell starred in the film, and several songs that were used in Warner Brothers cartoons originate from that film. And obviously it's the title track you hear throughout the cartoon, la-di-da, all that fun stuff. Unfortunately, we don't know what the original opening title sounds like because since this is a Blue Ribbon reissue, we don't have the opening titles, and I'm also assuming that the actual musical cue that Stalling wrote for the opening titles has been sadly lost to time. It's always a bummer when we get to these Blue Ribbon reissues. We jump into the overture to The Poet and the Peasant by Franz von Suppé, and I spoke in depth about Franz von Suppé in a prior Manny's Music Time. So if you want to learn more about The Poet and the Peasant Overture, as well as the composer Franz von Suppé, please listen to the commentary I did for Shake Your Powder Puff. Now, The Poet and the Peasant has been used tons of times in animation. In Warner Brothers, in Walter Lantz, there's a cartoon, I think it was Andy Panda, that uses The Poet and the Peasant. It's been used in other Warner Brothers shorts, like I said. And one of my favorite Popeye cartoons, 1935's The Spinach Overture, features The Poet and the Peasant. And you hear this piece in the very beginning when you have the caricature of Alexander Woolcott doing his spiel. Now, Anthony's probably going to talk about this in his segment, but this footage was lost for many years, and around 2004, it was found and added on the Looney Tunes Golden Collection Volume 2, and I remember this was when I was still pretty early to the whole nerd scene, and hearing about this cut section of the cartoon that was restored, so thank you guys. It's cool to have a little bit of a quote-unquote lost media, coming back and being seen for a new generation. So later on in the cartoon, you hear the piece Gavotte, which was written by a French composer named Francois-Joseph Gossec. Probably butchered his name. And as you could tell, he was a French composer of the classical period. Because everybody uses that term classical music, referring to quote-unquote Western art music. You know, the stuff that conservatories talk about and you learn in music class when you're a kid. But if you want to be technical, you have the Baroque period, that's where Bach and Vivaldi, composers like that. The Romantic period, that's more of people like Wagner and Brahms and Tchaikovsky and composers of that like. And the actual classical period, which was, I would say, the mid-1700s up until 1820-ish. And Beethoven was a composer that kind of bridged the classical to the Romantic period. But the big dog of that era is Mozart. You have Haydn as well. And the composer of Gavotte, Francois-Joseph Gossec, is from that time period. So he was a little bit older than Mozart from what I remember reading. He was born in the 1730s. And that is the piece that you hear during that rather grotesque static shot of the monsters. You got the Frankenstein's monster and Mr. Hyde and the Invisible Man and Fu Manchu just like glaring at the screen. And I'll admit, like, if I saw that as a kid, that would have probably freaked me out. And I can only imagine how creepy that looked on a huge screen back in the day. And that's at, I was actually looking at the cue sheet, and prior to this cartoon, the one that was released before it was Porky's Party, and Carl Stalling also used this same piece. This is the theme song of the gift that he received of the little silkworm sewing, and this is the same piece that you hear. It's a gavotte in D major, and the gavotte is a type of French dance that was adopted or adapted into music, so to speak.
So, little silkworm.
So the next cue we have is Vieni Vieni, and this was written by several people. You have George Cogère, I'm probably saying it wrong, and Henry Varna or Henri Varna with the lyrics, and the music was composed by Vincent Scotto, but the English lyrics were written by our friend Rudy Vallee. I spoke about Vieni Vieni in a prior commentary, but just to give you a little refresher, it was originally a song written in French, but the chorus was sung in Italian, and it's from 1934. Rudy Vallee made the song famous in 1937 and had the song, he adopted it, or adapted, excuse me. I keep saying adopting. I'm not adopting the song, I'm adapting the song. Adopt, don't shop, for us pet lovers. But yeah, he adapted the song to English. He wrote English lyrics. As for Vincent Scotto, he was a prolific French composer born in 1874, and Cogère was born in 1894 in France. This is when the Invisible Man is, and you have a little tap off, and then you have, I believe, is a caricature of Bill Robinson. I've always liked this particular arrangement of Vieni Vieni. It's used in other Warner Brothers shorts, but I just like the way that Carl Stalling and Milt Franklin adapted it for this particular cartoon. And then we jump to reused animation, the song Swing for Sale, which was composed by Sammy Kahn and Saul Chaplin. Now, this footage is pretty much directly lifted from the 1937 Merry Melody, Clean Pastures, which is arguably my favorite of the Central 11, mainly because of how cool the music is in that cartoon, period. Maybe not cool, but just I enjoy the way that it's played and arranged and all that. But yeah, according to Keith Scott's book on voices in cartoons, because I did not bring this up because I was on the commentary for Clean Pastures. This was when I was early on Anthony's channel. According to his book, during the Swing for Sale scene, a gentleman by the name of Scott Whitaker is the Cab Calloway imitator for Swing for Sale. And the Basin Street Boys are the ones that are singing Rhythm's What This Country Needs. Now, according to some websites, it says that the Four Blackbirds did the voices of the backup singers in the initial part of the Swing for Sale scene. But I'm going by Keith's book, and Keith has been working on his book for almost as literally as long as I've been alive. So if I didn't see it on here, I'll take his word for it. And according to his book, it does say vocal chorus for that Swing for Sale part. And it says, according to his book, Billy Bletcher did the Clean Pastures basso overdub. So that's a boom, 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 boom. That super low note that I can't sing because I'm not a bass. I'm a tenor. And speaking of bass, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit because there's something I really like when it comes to that voice. So the next track we hear is Boulevardier from the Bronx by our buddies Al Dubin and Harry Warren, the Lennon and McCartney of the Warner Brothers world. You want to know more about Harry Warren? Check out A Great Big Bunch of You, Al Dubin, The Girl at the Ironing Board. And this is what you hear in the scene where the caricature of William Powell walks out of the Thin Man book, and you hear, I just love the way it's arranged. You have a trombone going, wah, 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 wah. I don't know what it is with Boulevardier from the Bronx, but just the way that it's arranged in these cartoons. I mean, I went in detail. Check out the commentary I did for Porky the Fireman of probably my favorite use of that song in any Warner Brothers cartoon with the Tashlin dog. What did he say? That guy, and the way that it's arranged there, it's just so, I almost said a bad word, so freaking hilarious in that particular short. But here it's also great having the trombone play the melody when he's walking to the White House cookbook. And I wouldn't mind getting some food right about now. I don't know from the White House. Definitely not from the White House now. But yeah, he gets a good meal, and then he walks back. When he starts walking in profile again, I always got a kick out of that scene. You hear like the xylophones playing, wah, 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 wah. Oh, Carl Stalling, Mill Franklin, stop being so good. Well, they're both dead, so I guess they did stop, but they're great. I'll talk more about this particular song when I get to the commentary for Boulevardier from the Bronx, which I haven't recorded yet because I'm jumping around in the musical timeline, so to speak. Why am I doing an evil laugh? So the next cue that you hear, it's the song You're the Cure for What Ails Me, which is written by Harold Arlen and Yip Hartberg. If you want more information about those two composers, and they're very famous, I mean, they wrote the music for The Wizard of Oz, please check out the commentary I did for Sunday Go to Meeting Time, where I go in more in depth about them. Now, here's the thing. I was having trouble trying to find where exactly in the score this was. I believe it's the music that's in between the Boulevardier from the Bronx sequence. And then after William Powell, the caricature, eats, you hear a little bit more because that's where it would fit according to the cue sheet, because you're bouncing between two different cues, and it says it's only 8 seconds long, which would make sense of the timing in between Boulevardier from the Bronx, but I don't really hear it. I was listening to a recording of it from the film The Singing Kid from 1936 with Al Jolson singing it with Sybil Jason, and I was having trouble hearing the melody, so if someone else can point it out, I'd appreciate it, because right after that, the final cue that I'll be talking about is Old King Cole, which was once again written by Johnny Mercer and Richard Whiting. Now, I've always gotten a huge kick out of this performance in this cartoon. The Old King Cole himself is voiced. Now, some places say that he was voiced by Delos Jukas. I'm probably saying his name wrong, who's a prominent singer. He did voices in animation for many years. But according to Keith Scott's book, his voice was done by Harry Stanton, an actor who was on different shows. He was on Perry Mason. He was on Petticoat Junction. He was born December 7th, 1901, and he died February 7th, 1978. And I was trying to find a recording of him singing so I could have an idea of what he sounds like to compare it with the cartoon, but I wasn't able to do it at the time. So I'm going with what Keith says. It's Harry Stanton doing Old King Cole. And I just love the way that, once again, Stalling and Mill Franklin arranged and orchestrated. Just so fun. We got the dog playing the snare drum in between, the choir doing its thing, all the different caricatures that are in there, you know, Rip Van Winkle trying to fall asleep with all this noise. And then at the end of the cartoon, you have a reprise of the title track, Have You Got Any Castles? And again, I just love the way that it's orchestrated. I'm looking at the film right now, and you hear the melody being sung by the group, and then you hear like a quote-unquote Indian version of it. I really love the part where you have Emily Post and Henry VIII eating like slobs, or pretty much what I do every night. And you hear the trombone playing wah, 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 in the background, and it's so hilarious. And then, of course, you see the scene with the Pied Piper playing, I guess not a pipe, it would be a clarinet because it sounds like that, when he's trying to lead all the mice. And of course, a lot of this is a bit of a throwback to the earlier Merry Melodies where the cartoon's about to end. They pick up the tempo, the title track, and oh my goodness, the villain, it has to be stopped, which is the Three Musketeers, which is kind of weird. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. I thought I would talk a little bit longer, but there's a lot of repeating from other stuff I've done, and I don't want Anthony to go insane with all these edits. Or do I? All right, folks, thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting Anthony's channel. Thanks for supporting my work. You can follow me on social media at the Toony Tenor, TheToonyTenor, for my updates as a musician and a multifaceted geek of various pop culture things. Of course, Looney Tunes Merry Melodies are my number one love. And thanks for listening. Anything I did weird or wrong, please write in the comment, and then we'll go from there. So thanks for listening, folks. Have an awesome day. I'm recording this June 2nd, 2025. Summer's almost here. Maybe I should go build a castle, or... do I have a castle? No, I don't have a castle. I live in New Jersey, not in Europe or something. Never mind, I digress. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Manny. And just a few words now from my good friend Austin Kelly, and he's going to pose one interesting question that I'm going to answer for you straight after.
Cheers to everybody out there. This is Austin Kelly coming to you today to talk a little bit about Have You Got Any Castles from 1938, one of the last Frank Tashlin cartoons from his first tenure as director at Warner Brothers. Well, this is a really interesting cartoon, and it's not really talked about, and that's interesting because I've watched it so many times. I love the energy in this goddamn thing, and I never got the argument that you're not really supposed to get the references. Like, if you don't get the references, then you're not supposed to be able to appreciate this as much, because I know there are a lot of references to literature and perhaps some pop culture from the day, but like, I don't know, as a kid, I always loved this cartoon. I didn't have to understand what was going on just to be able to appreciate, like, the layers in the comedy and the energy. It was fantastic. It always has been. Also, listen carefully, because I think it's one of Carl Stallings' most underrated soundtracks. It's really nicely done all around. The Alexander Woolcott caricature at the beginning and ending is really neat. And I like that Alexander Woolcott requested that those scenes be cut after he died. I think that's a really bizarre, specific thing to request. And I guess you could also say it kind of went against his wishes that Warner's restored those scenes to the cartoon in 2004 for the restoration on the second Golden Collection. But something I don't understand, I'm looking to the audience here to help me out if anyone knows this answer. It's been explained to me before, but even after the explanation, I did not understand it. The reasoning behind how the restoration has the Alexander Woolcott scenes added, but does not have the original titles. This to me is very puzzling, because those scenes are from an original print. So if they had an original print, why did they use blue ribbon titles? We've never really had an answer for that. And I believe that when they were supposed to include those scenes originally on the 5th volume of the Golden Age of Looney Tunes Laserdisc back in the 90s, that they were using a print with original titles. Now, if I'm really missing something here, please let me know, but I would love to find out the answer. Anyway, Have You Got Any Castles? Pretty good cartoon. Not much to say about it, but it is fantastic. Go check it out and get to sniffing on that original title question, because really, I don't understand what the heck is going on.
Thanks, Austin. So I alluded earlier about the whole thing where when this was released, it was released with the opening and ending put back in, but it was still done via the Blue Ribbon reissue. And yeah, I'm not sure why they did that, but my good friend Essie Peter, who's on through these reviews, he let me know that the footage came from a saved print that was used to mark where to edit the negative at the time. That's why you see those splices, because they would show, okay, you need to cut here, and off you go. So it was likely that that was perhaps the last one that they have. So what they likely did when making this for the DVD, they took the Blue Ribbon reissue and they just put everything in, because the original titles are still apparently missing. Maybe they'll be found someday. Hopefully they will. I don't know. But there's your answer, that this is pretty much a saved print that just wasn't discarded, and thankfully it wasn't. Now, after all that, and I know it's a nice long review, after all that, what do I think of this one? Look, this one's actually quite entertaining. It's just got a lot of energy to it, and it feels very brisk. So it starts off nice and calm and so on, and once the books all come to life, everything goes really chaotic and we get nice calm at the end. I think it's funnier now that I know a lot of the references, especially that stupid drumming bulldog thing that we saw earlier on. But out of the 3 books coming to life trilogy, I still think You're in Education is probably the better one out of the 3. But look, this one gets 8 out of 10. I do enjoy it. It's not the best that Tashlин's done, it's not the worst, but it's quite fun. But you can be the judge of that, because I'm going to play the short for you right now. as was found on the Gold Collection Volume 2 DVD set. But that will do it for this review. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and until next time, take care.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. Tonight the muses sing, and we hearken to Pan as with sweetly piping lute he wends us through a delightful phantasmagoria with the deathless heroes of legend and history and the entrancing figures of fiction and fantasy. And first among our illustrious hosts, we want you to meet
If the rhythm's been too dreamy, and you like your trumpet screaming, that's when you should call to see me, 'cause I've got swing for sale. If you think a waltz is horrid, and you like your rhythm torrid, till it makes you mop your forehead, I've got swing for sale. Rhythm's what this country needs. For years and years I've said, if you buy from me, it's COD. I sell swing, but not for credit.
Boom, 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 boom.
When I was a child, I thought quite a lot of the famous people in the storybooks I got. As I grew in size, so did I grow wise, and I've learned some things that really opened up my eyes. But in spite of everything I learned, there's one old guy who still is high as far as I'm concerned.
Old King Cole, am a merry old soul.
But the old boy loves to have his fling.
Old King Cole, I'm a merry old soul.
But he waved his scepter with a swing. Here is a man who never fooled around, but daily he makes with TNT. And now he's up yonder with a ring around.
They called for Mr. Christian and went on a mutiny.
Old King Cole is a noisy old soul.
Because he had his fling, and because he liked to swing.
I went down in history.
So perhaps there's a chance for me. Have you got any castles that you want to fill, baby?
Such a lack of good manners, you should swallow my book, Henry.
I'll get out my scissors, that cut.
Have you got any mortgages you want to have paid, baby?
After all my adventures, I'll throw.
I love
Help! Help! Jailbreak! Help!
Why don't they let me sleep? This is your town crier again. The music fades and the departing celebrants bid us adieu, happy with the memories of the Bookland frolic. All is well. All is well.